So, now that the time to enter the NFL draft is over, I'll be making a video on the top 10 players that could have entered the draft this time, but decided to come back to college. And this won't include players that uh, could have won the draft, but mm, stayed in college but transferred to another school. This will be only players that came back to their same school. Mm, So, mm, mm, to me, the top player that mm, uh, is coming back is mm, quarterback Carson Beck from Georgia. Mm, mm, He mm, threw for 3,941 yards, mm, mm, and that's a lot of yards uh, for 14 games that uh, Georgia played. Uh, mm, and he completed 72.4% of his passes, which mm, that's very accurate. And he had a 9.5 yard per throw average. That's very good. Mm, and he also threw 24 touchdown passes. Mm, He mm, turned out to be a mm, really good replacement for Stetson Bennett, who was their quarterback when they won those two championships. Mm, He'll be one of the top quarterbacks this year, and uh, will be a Heisman candidate. Mm, The only thing that he doesn't really have that Stetson Bennett had was being able to run around a lot. But as a passer, I'd say mm, he's just as good as Stetson Bennett is. Mm, And number two is uh, quarterback Quinn Ewers of Texas. Mm, he uh, is a 2-year starter there, but uh, in his first year there as the starter, he was a decent quarterback, but really it was this past season that he actually got uh, to be a really good quarterback. Mm, he had the uh, really good game against Alabama, which Alabama had one of the top defenses last year, and then mm, uh, in the uh, Big 12 championship game, he set a record for most passing yards in a Big 12 championship game. Mm, mm. He mm, mm, threw for 3,479 yards, mm, and that's a lot of yards. And mm, he completed 69% of his passes. That's very good. And uh, an 8.8 yard uh, per throw average. It also is pretty good. Mm, And he also threw 22 touchdown passes. Mm, so mm, mm, Texas will have to replace uh, some uh, talent from last year's team, like all teams will have to do. Uh, but if they can replace it really well, then uh, mm, they will have a good chance at winning the national championship this year. Mm, mm, And mm, Ewers will be uh, a Heisman possibility and one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Mm, And uh, he mm, might be able to have his best year this year. Mm, And mm, number three is linebacker Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma. Mm, he might be the best defensive player in the country this coming year. He's been one of the best linebackers, if not the best linebacker, these past two seasons. Mm, he's had over 100 tackles in both of the last two seasons. Mm, mm, he had 125 tackles in uh, 2022, and mm, he had 104 tackles in 2023, and he missed a whole game and part of another last year. He would have had more than that. Mm, mm. So, uh, Oklahoma getting him back is big for uh, their move to the SEC this coming season. Because in the SEC, to stay at or close to the top of the conference, you have to have a good defense. Mm, And mm, number four is Trey Harris, the wide receiver for Ole Miss. And as an Ole Miss fan, I was really happy to see that he was coming back. Uh, mm, he was one of the best receivers in the country last year and will be possibly the best receiver in the country this year. Mm, mm. He missed two whole games last year and most of another game, but he still had uh, 54 catches and 985 yards mm, and 8 touchdowns. And mm, mm, he had 5 games where he had over 100 receiving yards, and he even had one game where he had over 200 receiving yards uh, this season. Mm, and it, his 18.2 yard per catch average is so good. And mm, number five is wide receiver uh, Emeka Abuka from Ohio State. Mm, Him coming back is big for them uh, because their top receiver Marvin Harrison is entering the draft. So Abuka will probably become their top receiver this year, and he's close to as good as Marvin Harrison is. Mm, mm, he was hurt this year and missed uh, 3 whole games, but he still had 41 catches for 515 yards and 4 touchdowns on a 12.6 yards per catch average. And the year before this one, before he got hurt when he was healthy, he had 74 catches for 1,151 yards and uh, 10 touchdowns and a 15.6 yards per catch average. That's really good. So he'll be one of the top receivers this year. Mm, And at number six is quarterback Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. Mm, He is a 2-year starter. He wasn't that good uh, of a passer. Mm, mm, And mm, his first year as a starter at Ole Miss, he couldn't really throw the deep ball very well. Uh, but he got better at that uh, this past season. Mm, and mm, had 3,364 passing yards, completed 65.1% of his passes, mm, and that's good. And he had a 9.5 yards per throw uh, average. That's very good. And he also threw 23 touchdown passes and uh, only threw 5 interceptions. It's always good if you have a quarterback that doesn't turn the ball over a lot, which he didn't. and he can also run around some too. He had 391 rushing yards this past season and 8 rushing touchdowns. Mm, mm. So, uh, getting him back uh, next year for me as an Ole Miss fan is very good news. Mm, Number 7 is quarterback Cameron Rising from Utah. Mm, He's coming back after missing all of last season because of a torn ACL injury that happened in the bowl game the year before. Uh, and mm, he really kind of has to come back because of uh, the injury that he had. He needs another year of uh, college to prove that he can still play well after the injury. Uh, mm, and mm, uh, it was obvious this year how much he meant to Utah's team uh, because their offense this past season wasn't any good at all. That they had so much trouble moving the ball and scoring points, and uh, mm, Rising is a 2-year starter. The last season as the starter at Utah, mm, he threw for 3,034 yards mm, mm, in 13 games and uh, completed 64.7% of his passes and had a 7.9 uh, yards per throw average and uh, also threw 26 touchdown passes. And he can also run too. Mm, He added 465 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns that season and averaged 6 yards per run. Uh, mm, so mm, mm, he's a good quarterback and runner. Uh, mm, Even though Utah does love to run the football. Mm, And number 8's quarterback Jalen Milroe from Alabama. He just announced that he's staying at Alabama, even though uh, Nick Saban is retired. Uh, he's a very good deep ball passer, and he's uh, good at running around. He has a lot of speed, but he does need to improve on his accuracy at throwing shorter passes because uh, I watched so much Alabama football this past season, and there were a bunch of times where he missed on those short throws. He will have to get better at that. Mm, mm, but he does have a chance to be a mm, Heisman possibility to maybe win the trophy mm, this year. Of course, Nick Saban's retirement could hurt that. We don't know yet. Mm, But mm, he threw for 2,834 yards and uh, mm, completed 65.8% of his passes, and that is pretty accurate. Mm, mm, And mm, uh, also, he had a 10 yards per throw average, and that's very good. Part of that was because of so many deep ball pass completions. Mm, Also, he threw 23 touchdown passes, and he added 531 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns. He uh, had 2 games this past season where he ran for uh, mm, over 100 yards, and uh, mm, he got benched after the Texas loss, mm, and uh, didn't play at all in their third game. But uh, he after that won the starting job for the rest of the season. So he did that in 13 games. Mm, and number 9 is tight end Caden Prescorn uh, from Ole Miss. Another player that it's great to have back as an Ole Miss fan. Uh, mm, he could be the best tight end in the country this year. Mm, he missed several games uh, this past season, but uh, he really got good late in the season. Mm, mm, he had his best game in the Peach Bowl. Mm, mm, Penn State had no answers for him, and they have a really good defense. He had 10 catches for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. Mm, and in the season, he had 30 catches for 449 yards and 4 touchdowns. And uh, his 15 yards per catch average is really good for a tight end. Mm, mm, uh, and number 10 is running back Donovan Edwards from Michigan. Uh, he announced today that he'll be back next year for his final season of college football. Mm, And this is good news for Michigan because yesterday their starting running back Blake Corum entered the draft, and uh, mm, Donovan Edwards actually had a down year this past season. Mm, mm, he was expected to do more than he did, uh, mm, even though he was the backup to Blake Corum. Mm, 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 the season before, he had mm, mm, almost 1,000 yards at 991, and uh, he averaged 7.1 yards per carry and had 7 touchdown runs, and mm, uh, he had 140 carries that year, and uh, he was still the backup to Blake Corum that year, and uh, his number of carries went down this year to 119, and then he only ended up with 497 rushing yards last year, and his uh, average yards per carry went way down from 7.1 to 4.2 this past season, and he also added 5 touchdown runs this past season. But uh, mm, uh, he had 5 games in 2022 where he ran for 100 or more yards, including uh, the game uh, against Ohio State where he had 216 on 22 carries. Mm, mm, mm. And this past season, he uh, mm, didn't have a 100-yard game until the national championship game, uh, mm, uh, where he had 104 yards on only 6 carries, and he had those 2 really big touchdown runs. So uh, mm, it looks like maybe he's finally getting back to how he was before. Uh, because he'll probably be uh, Michigan's starting running back uh, this coming season. Mm, So that will be it with this video, and I'll do a video about the top transfers very soon. And please subscribe, and thanks again for watching another video.